July 2017, Ann Arbor District Court witnesses the unthinkable. 17-year-old Dante Wright laughs and taunts the grieving family of Jordan Clay, the teenager he executed. Judge David Caprio watches in disbelief as Wright mocks a mother's pain during sentencing. But what Judge Caprio does next will remind everyone that evil actions have consequences, and that no courtroom tolerates the mockery of innocent victims. This is Dante Wright's story, and it shows what happens when remorseless evil meets unwavering justice in a courtroom where humanity matters more than gang bravado. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from, because we all need to see justice served for victims who can no longer speak for themselves. The heavy wooden doors of Ann Arbor District Court swing open on July 24, 2017, revealing a packed courtroom, thick with tension. Summer heat mingles with anticipation as spectators file into worn wooden benches, their whispered conversations creating a low hum that fills the chamber. News reporters clutch their notepads in the back rows, cameras positioned strategically to capture what promises to be one of Michigan's most watched sentencing hearings. The courtroom itself bears the weight of countless legal battles. High ceilings adorned with classical moldings speak to the dignity of justice, while fluorescent lights cast stark shadows across faces marked by grief, anger, and expectation. The American flag stands sentinel beside the judge's bench, a reminder that justice is the cornerstone of civilized society. Two distinct groups occupy opposite sides of the gallery, separated by more than just an aisle. On the left sit the supporters of Jordan Clay, their faces etched with the kind of pain that only comes from losing someone precious. These are teachers who remember a bright student, friends who shared dreams of college, family members whose lives were forever altered on a October night. Their clothing speaks of Sunday best, worn for solemn occasions, dark colors chosen out of respect for both the victim and the gravity of these proceedings. On the right, a smaller contingent has gathered for Dante Wright. His mother, Antoinette Cardar, sits rigidly in the front row, her jaw set in defiance even before the hearing begins. She clutches a worn purse like armor, her eyes scanning the room with the wariness of someone who has spent months defending the indefensible. Behind her, a handful of relatives and community supporters maintain expressions carefully neutral, unsure whether they are here to support a troubled young man or witness the sentencing of a cold-blooded killer. The crime that brought them all here occurred on October 4, 2016, a date that will forever mark the end of innocence for two families. That evening, as autumn painted Ann Arbor in shades of gold and crimson, 18-year-old Jordan Clay believed he was meeting acquaintances for what he thought was a routine social gathering. Jordan was everything parents hope their children will become. A senior at Pioneer High School, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who understood that education was his pathway to a better life. His backpack contained homework assignments and college brochures. His phone held text messages from friends discussing weekend plans and conversations with his mother about future possibilities. Jordan had dreams that stretched beyond the boundaries of his neighborhood. Visions of university dormitories and graduation ceremonies where his family would beam with pride from the audience. But Dante Wright had different plans for that October evening. The 17-year-old had spent weeks cultivating what appeared to be a friendship with Jordan, learning his routines, his trustful nature, his habit of carrying the modest earnings from his part-time job. Wright, along with his accomplices Del Rio Gracie and Terrarius Ellison, had identified Jordan not as a peer with hopes and dreams, but as a target for what they callously termed a quick score. The location Wright chose for their meeting was isolated, a secluded area where screams would not carry and witnesses were unlikely. As Jordan arrived, believing he was among friends, Wright and his accomplices surrounded him. Their demands were simple: empty your pockets, hand over your phone, give us everything you have. Jordan, raised to be respectful and non-confrontational, complied without resistance. He offered no threats, made no aggressive moves, simply did as he was told, in the hope that cooperation would lead to his safe release. What happened next defies comprehension. As Jordan stood with his hands visible, having given the robbers everything they demanded, Wright pulled out a gun. There was no struggle, no attempt by Jordan to fight back or flee. In a moment that would haunt investigators and prosecutors for years to come, Wright placed the weapon against the back of Jordan's head and pulled the trigger. The execution was swift, methodical, and completely unnecessary for the success of their robbery. Jordan Klee died instantly, his dreams of college and future achievements extinguished in a single, senseless moment. His body would be discovered hours later by a jogger, setting in motion an investigation that would ultimately lead police to Wright and his accomplices. The arrest came 6 days later, on October 10, 2016. Police had worked around the clock, following leads and examining evidence that pointed inexorably toward Wright and his co-conspirators. When detectives knocked on Wright's door, they found not a frightened teenager overwhelmed by the magnitude of his actions, but a young man who seemed almost relieved to finally discuss what he had done. The interrogation that followed revealed depths of callousness that seasoned investigators found disturbing. Wright confessed to the murder with a casual detachment that suggested he was discussing the weather rather than the taking of a human life. He showed no signs of remorse, no indication that he understood the gravity of his actions or the pain he had inflicted on Jordan's family. Most shocking of all, when asked about his lifestyle and motivations, Wright began to rap about his gang affiliations, turning the interview room into a stage where he performed verses celebrating violence and criminal behavior. The detectives exchanged glances of disbelief as this teenager treated their investigation like an opportunity for artistic expression rather than a reckoning with the consequences of murder. His accomplices, Gracie and Ellison, were arrested shortly after and ultimately accepted plea agreements that resulted in sentences of 15 to 30 years each. Their cooperation with prosecutors provided additional details about the planning and execution of the crime, painting a picture of a calculated act rather than a robbery gone wrong. Throughout the months of legal proceedings that followed, plea negotiations moved forward with the assumption that Wright would accept responsibility for his actions and show appropriate remorse for the taking of Jordan's life. The proposed agreement called for a sentence of 23 to 50 years for second-degree murder, a significant punishment that would ensure Wright remained incarcerated until middle age, while avoiding the possibility of life without parole that could result from a first-degree murder conviction. Defense attorneys worked diligently to prepare Wright for his court appearances, explaining the importance of showing respect for the proceedings and empathy for the victim's family. They emphasized that his demeanor in court would be closely observed by Judge David Schwartz, a man whose 23 years as a prosecutor had given him an encyclopedic knowledge of human nature and criminal behavior. Judge Schwartz, known throughout the legal community by his respected nickname Judge Caprio, had built his reputation on fairness tempered by firmness. His transition from prosecutor to judge had been seamless, earning praise from defense attorneys and prosecutors alike for his thoughtful approach to complex cases. Those who appeared before him knew they would receive a fair hearing, but they also understood that he possessed an unwavering commitment to justice that would not be swayed by manipulation or false displays of remorse. As July 24, 2017 approached, all parties prepared for what they assumed would be a solemn but straightforward sentencing hearing. The plea agreement was in place, the victim impact statements had been prepared, and Wright had been coached on appropriate courtroom behavior. What none of them anticipated was that this hearing would become a defining moment in the career of Judge Caprio and a cautionary tale about the consequences of showing one's true nature in a court of law. Judge David Schwartz enters the courtroom with the measured stride of a man who has spent decades navigating the complexities of human justice. At 58 years old, his presence commands immediate attention without requiring theatrics or raised voices. His black robes flow behind him as he approaches the bench, each step deliberate and purposeful. The bailiff calls for all to rise, and the packed courtroom responds with a collective rustle of clothing and shuffling of feet. Those who know Judge Schwartz understand why his colleagues and the legal community have come to call him Judge Caprio. The nickname speaks to more than mere familiarity. It represents a recognition of his unique ability to balance compassion with unwavering adherence to the law. His face bears the lines of someone who has witnessed humanity at both its best and worst, yet his eyes retain a clarity that suggests neither cynicism nor naive optimism have clouded his judgment. Judge Caprio's journey to this bench began 23 years earlier as a young prosecutor fresh from law school. He had seen his first murder case at 26, his first child victim at 28, his first case of senseless gang violence before his 30th birthday. Each case had taught him something about the delicate balance between justice and mercy, between punishment and rehabilitation, between protecting society and offering hope for redemption. His reputation throughout Michigan's legal community rests on pillars of consistency and fairness. Defense attorneys respect him because they know their clients will receive thoughtful consideration of mitigating factors. Prosecutors trust him because they understand he will not allow sympathy to override the demands of justice. Victims' families have learned that Judge Caprio will listen to their pain with genuine attention, while ensuring that emotion does not replace careful legal reasoning. The physical presence he brings to the courtroom speaks to an inner strength forged through decades of difficult decisions. His graying hair is neatly trimmed, his posture erect without being rigid. When he speaks, his voice carries the authority of experience rather than the bluster of insecurity. His hands, weathered by years of holding gavels and signing sentences, move with the precision of someone who understands that every gesture carries weight in this sacred space. Judge Caprio settles into his chair and surveys the courtroom with eyes that miss nothing. He observes the victim's family clustered on the left side, their grief visible in slumped shoulders and tear-stained faces. He notes the smaller group supporting the defendant, their expressions a mixture of defiance and uncertainty. His gaze takes in the media representatives, the court officers, and the attorneys preparing their final arguments. Then his attention turns to Dante Roger Wright, and what he sees troubles him immediately. Wright sits at the defense table with a posture that speaks volumes about his attitude toward these proceedings. At 17, he possesses the physical development of a young man, but displays none of the solemnity appropriate for someone facing decades in prison for taking another person's life. His clothing, chosen by his defense team to present a respectful appearance, seems to sit uncomfortably on his frame, as if the very act of dressing appropriately for court goes against his nature. The most striking aspect of Wright's appearance lies not in his clothing, but in the permanent markings he has chosen to display across his body. Tattoos cover his arms and neck, intricate designs that tell the story of his allegiance to the gangster disciples. These are not the casual body art of typical teenagers experimenting with self-expression. They are deliberate declarations of loyalty to a criminal organization that has terrorized communities across the Midwest. The tattoos speak to a young man who has embraced a lifestyle that glorifies violence and views law-abiding citizens as prey rather than fellow human beings. Each marking represents a choice Wright made to identify himself with an organization whose very existence depends on the intimidation and exploitation of others. The ink under his skin tells a story of rejected opportunities, dismissed guidance from adults, and a deliberate embrace of criminality as a path to respect and financial gain. Wright's physical demeanor in the courtroom reveals even more about his character than his tattoos. While others in the room maintain appropriate silence and respect for the proceedings, Wright shifts restlessly in his chair, his eyes roaming the courtroom as if he were attending a social gathering rather than facing judgment for murder. His facial expressions cycle through smirks, eye rolls, and barely concealed laughter, suggesting that he views the entire legal process as an inconvenience rather than a reckoning with the consequences of his actions. The disconnect between the gravity of his situation and his casual attitude becomes more apparent as Judge Caprio observes his interactions with his defense attorney. When his lawyer attempts to speak with him in hushed tones about proper courtroom behavior, Wright responds with dismissive gestures and expressions that suggest he considers such advice beneath his consideration. His body language communicates a belief that the rules governing civilized behavior do not apply to him. Wright's background, as detailed in pre-sentencing reports, reveals a pattern of escalating criminal behavior that culminated in Jordan Clay's murder. Born and raised in Ann Arbor, he had access to the same educational opportunities as his victim, the same community resources, the same potential for positive development. Yet at every critical juncture, Wright had chosen the path that led him deeper into criminal activity. His expulsion from school had not resulted from a single incident, but from a sustained pattern of disruptive behavior, violence toward other students, and complete disregard for authority figures who attempted to guide him toward better choices. Teachers who had tried to reach him described a young man who seemed to take pride in his ability to intimidate others, and who viewed academic achievement as a sign of weakness rather than accomplishment. The petty crimes that marked his juvenile record told a story of progressive moral decline. What began with shoplifting and vandalism escalated to robbery and assault. Each arrest seemed to reinforce his belief that the criminal justice system was powerless to touch him, that his youth would shield him from serious consequences. The warnings from juvenile court judges, the interventions attempted by social workers, the pleas from family members who still believed in his potential for redemption had all fallen on deaf ears. Wright's mother, Antoinette Cardar, sits in the gallery behind her son, her face a study in maternal denial and defensive anger. Throughout the months of legal proceedings, she has maintained her son's innocence despite his confession to police. Her explanations for his behavior have evolved from claims of mistaken identity to suggestions that he was manipulated by older gang members to assertions that mental health issues cloud his judgment and diminish his responsibility for his actions. Her presence in the courtroom represents the tragedy that extends beyond the immediate victim to encompass families on both sides of violent crime. As a mother, her instinct to protect and defend her child conflicts with the overwhelming evidence of his guilt and the testimony of witnesses who have described his callous behavior both during and after the murder. Her inability to acknowledge the reality of her son's actions has made her a sympathetic figure to some observers and a frustrating obstacle to justice in the eyes of others. The contrast between the two families could not be more stark. While the Clee family has conducted themselves with dignity throughout the legal process, focusing on honoring Jordan's memory rather than seeking revenge, Wright's family has consistently attempted to minimize his responsibility and deflect blame onto others. This difference in response reflects deeper philosophical divisions about accountability, personal responsibility, and the role of external circumstances in shaping criminal behavior. As Judge Caprio prepares to begin the sentencing hearing, he carries with him the weight of 23 years of similar moments. He has sentenced gang members before, has seen the devastating impact of youth violence on communities, has struggled with the balance between punishment and the possibility of rehabilitation for young offenders. Yet something about Daunte Wright's demeanor suggests that this case will challenge his experience and test his commitment to justice in ways he has not previously encountered. The stage is set for a confrontation between a seasoned jurist committed to upholding the dignity of the legal system and a teenage killer who appears to believe that his age and attitude will shield him from the full consequences of his actions. Judge Caprio adjusts his robes and reaches for his gavel, unaware that the next hour will define not only Wright's future, but also serve as a powerful reminder of the authority that courts possess when confronted with unrepentant evil. The heavy silence that typically accompanies the entry of a defendant breaks as Daunte Wright shuffles into the courtroom in shackles. The metallic clink of chains against the floor creates an ominous rhythm that should humble any person facing decades behind bars. Yet Wright's entrance defies every expectation of appropriate courtroom behavior. His head swivels from side to side as he surveys the packed gallery, his expression resembling someone attending a sporting event rather than his own murder sentencing. Judge Caprio watches this display with growing unease. In his decades of experience, he has observed that most defendants arrive for sentencing, carrying the weight of their actions. Even the most hardened criminals typically understand that this moment represents a crossroads between their past choices and their future consequences. They may maintain their innocence, they may feel anger toward the system, but they rarely treat the proceedings as entertainment. Wright, however, seems energized by the attention. As the bailiff guides him to the defense table, he makes eye contact with several spectators and actually nods in acknowledgement, as if greeting friends at a social gathering. His defense attorney, clearly uncomfortable with his client's demeanor, places a firm hand on Wright's shoulder and whispers urgently in his ear. Wright responds with a dismissive shrug and continues his visual tour of the courtroom. The defendant's inappropriate behavior becomes more pronounced as he settles into his chair. Rather than facing forward toward Judge Caprio, as protocol demands, Wright continues turning around to observe the gallery behind him. His eyes linger on the victim's family section, where Karen Clay sits surrounded by relatives whose faces reflect months of grief and anticipation for this moment of justice. Instead of showing any recognition of their pain or acknowledgement of his role in causing it, Wright's expression suggests mild amusement. Judge Caprio leans forward slightly, his trained eye cataloging every detail of Wright's conduct. The judge has developed an ability to read defendants that goes beyond their words to encompass their entire presentation. body language, facial expressions, and reactions to mention of their crimes all provide valuable insight into their character and genuine feelings about their actions. What he observes in Wright troubles him deeply. As the preliminary proceedings begin, Wright's disrespectful behavior escalates rather than subsides. When the court clerk reads the charges against him, including the second-degree murder of Jordan Klee, Wright responds with an exaggerated yawn that carries throughout the silent courtroom. The gesture is so deliberately theatrical that it cannot be attributed to nervousness or fatigue. This is a young man making a conscious choice to demonstrate his contempt for the legal process. The victim's family members exchange shocked glances at Wright's display. They have spent months preparing themselves emotionally for this day, hoping to see some sign that the person who destroyed their lives understands the magnitude of his actions. Instead, they witness behavior that suggests Wright views Jordan's death as inconsequential and these proceedings as an unfortunate interruption to his daily routine. Wright's defense attorney attempts damage control by engaging his client in whispered conversation, clearly trying to correct his behavior before it irreparably harms his case. The lawyer's facial expressions reveal his frustration and growing panic as Wright responds to his guidance with eye rolls and dismissive gestures. Years of legal experience have taught this attorney that judges notice everything, and his client's behavior is creating an impression that could override any mitigating factors they might present. Judge Caprio decides that intervention is necessary. His voice cuts through the courtroom's tension with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect. "Mr. Wright, you will face forward and show appropriate respect for these proceedings." The warning should serve as a wake-up call for any defendant with basic self-preservation instincts. Judge Caprio's reputation for fairness is matched only by his intolerance for courtroom misconduct. Defense attorneys throughout Michigan counsel their clients that showing respect in Judge Caprio's courtroom is not optional but essential for receiving fair consideration. Wright's response to this judicial warning reveals the depth of his disregard for authority. Rather than immediately correcting his posture and demonstrating compliance, he slowly turns to face forward while maintaining the same smirk that has characterized his behavior since entering the courtroom. His compliance is grudging and temporary, lasting only until Judge Caprio's attention turns to other matters before he resumes his inappropriate conduct. The moment arrives for the victim impact statement, traditionally one of the most solemn portions of any sentencing hearing. This is when the human cost of criminal behavior becomes most apparent, when abstract legal charges transform into real stories of lives destroyed and families shattered. Judge Caprio has presided over hundreds of these statements, witnessing the raw emotion of parents, spouses, and children as they struggle to articulate losses that defy description. He calls for the victim impact statement with the reverence appropriate to this sacred moment in the judicial process. The courtroom falls into absolute silence as Courtney Clay rises from her seat in the gallery. Her movement is careful and deliberate, weighted with the responsibility of speaking for a cousin who will never again speak for himself. She approaches the podium, carrying folded papers that represent her Aunt Karen's attempt to transform overwhelming grief into words. Judge Caprio observes the dignity with which Jordan's family has conducted themselves throughout these proceedings. Despite their pain, despite their anger at the senseless nature of his death, they have maintained respect for the legal process and faith in the possibility of justice. Their behavior stands in stark contrast to Wright's courtroom conduct and highlights the character differences between the victim's loved ones and his killer. Courtney's hands tremble as she unfolds her aunt's statement. The papers shake slightly, testament to the emotional weight of the words she is about to read. Judge Caprio recognizes this moment as one that will define the entire hearing. Victim impact statements have the power to transform courtroom proceedings, from abstract legal exercises into profound human encounters with justice. As Courtney begins to read, her voice carries the accumulated grief of months of waiting for this opportunity to speak Jordan's name in a court of law. Jordan was my heart, my soul, my everything. He had dreams of college. He was going to make something of himself. The words fill the courtroom with the weight of loss and unfulfilled potential. Spectators lean forward, attorneys pause their note-taking, and court officers stand more solemnly as they hear about a young man whose life was cut short just as it was beginning to flourish. This is the moment when everyone present should be reminded of why they are gathered, why the legal system exists, and why justice matters. Everyone, that is, except Dante Wright. As Courtney continues reading her aunt's words about Jordan's character, his dreams, and the devastating impact of his death, Wright begins to display behavior that defies comprehension. A small smile plays at the corners of his mouth, growing more pronounced as the emotional weight of the statement increases. When Courtney's voice breaks while reading about Jordan's college aspirations, Wright's smile widens into a barely concealed grin. Judge Caprio's grip on his gavel tightens as he witnesses this display of callousness. In 2 decades of sentencing hearings, he has never encountered a defendant who found amusement in a victim impact statement. Even the most hardened criminals typically show some recognition of the pain their actions have caused. If not from genuine remorse, then from basic self-interest in appearing sympathetic to the court. Wright's behavior suggests something far more disturbing than typical criminal indifference. His amusement at the family's grief indicates a level of moral bankruptcy that challenges Judge Caprio's fundamental beliefs about human nature and the possibility of redemption. As the judge watches Wright's inappropriate reactions to descriptions of Jordan's character and potential, he begins to question whether the plea agreement before him adequately addresses the evil he is witnessing. The rising tension in the courtroom becomes palpable as more spectators notice Wright's behavior. Whispers begin to circulate among those seated in the gallery, expressions of disbelief at what they are witnessing. The disconnect between the solemnity of Courtney's words and Wright's amused reaction creates an atmosphere of barely controlled outrage that threatens to disrupt the entire proceeding. Judge Caprio realizes that he is witnessing something unprecedented in his judicial career. This is not simply a case of a young defendant struggling with the gravity of his situation or responding inappropriately due to nervousness or immaturity. This is a deliberate display of contempt for the victim, the family, and the entire concept of justice that demands immediate intervention. The transformation of Wright's behavior from inappropriate smiling to audible mockery marks a point of no return in the courtroom proceedings. As Courtney Klee continues reading her aunt's heart-wrenching words about Jordan's dreams and character, small chuckles begin to escape from Wright's lips. The sound carries in the absolute silence of the courtroom, like drops of poison in pure water. Each laugh becomes more pronounced, more deliberate, more calculated to inflict maximum pain on the grieving family. Judge Caprio's face begins to redden as he witnesses this unprecedented display of cruelty. His 23 years of judicial experience have exposed him to the worst aspects of human behavior, but nothing has prepared him for a defendant who finds entertainment in a mother's grief. The judge's knuckles turn white as his grip on the gavel intensifies, his body language reflecting the internal struggle between his professional obligation to maintain courtroom decorum and his human revulsion at Wright's conduct. Wright seems to feed off the shocked reactions his behavior generates throughout the courtroom. As heads turn in his direction and expressions of disbelief spread among the spectators, his laughter becomes more theatrical. He begins shaking his head dismissively when Courtney reads about Jordan's academic achievements, as if the very concept of a young person striving for educational success strikes him as absurd or contemptible. The victim's family members struggle to process what they are witnessing. They have spent months preparing themselves emotionally for this sentencing hearing, understanding that they would face the person who destroyed their lives, but hoping to see some sign of humanity or remorse. Instead, they find themselves confronting a level of evil that challenges their fundamental beliefs about human nature and the possibility of redemption. Karen Klee, seated in the front row of the gallery, watches in horror as the killer of her only child treats her grief as a source of amusement. Her body begins to tremble, not with fear, but with a combination of rage and disbelief that anyone could be so devoid of basic human decency. The other family members move closer to her, forming a protective circle around the grieving mother as Wright's laughter continues to punctuate Courtney's emotional reading. Judge Caprio's voice cuts through the tension with increased authority and barely controlled anger. "Mr. Wright, you will show respect in this courtroom." The warning carries the weight of judicial power and personal outrage, serving notice that the court will not tolerate continued mockery of the victim impact statement. Most defendants, even those with extensive criminal histories and little respect for authority, recognize the moment when they have pushed a judge too far. The tone in Judge Caprio's voice would typically serve as an unmistakable signal that further misconduct could result in severe consequences, including the potential rejection of plea agreements and enhancement of sentences. Wright's response to this escalated warning reveals the depth of his antisocial personality and complete disconnection from normal behavioral boundaries. Rather than showing appropriate contrition, or at least tactical compliance, he meets Judge Caprio's stern gaze with a defiant stare that communicates his belief that judicial authority poses no real threat to his interests. His facial expression suggests amusement at the judge's anger rather than concern about potential consequences. The defense attorney's panic becomes more apparent as he recognizes that his client's behavior is destroying any possibility of receiving judicial sympathy or even basic fairness in sentencing considerations. Years of legal practice have taught him to read judicial temperament, and he can see that Judge Caprio is approaching a level of anger that could override the negotiated plea agreement. His whispered urgings to Wright become more frantic and insistent, but his client continues to ignore professional advice that could determine whether he spends decades or potentially life in prison. Wright's dismissive treatment of his own attorney's guidance demonstrates the same arrogance and disregard for authority that characterized his behavior leading up to Jordan's murder. Just as he had rejected the interventions of teachers, social workers, and family members who attempted to steer him away from criminal activity, he now rejects the counsel of the person most qualified to protect his legal interests. As Courtney continues reading the victim impact statement, describing Jordan's kindness to younger students and his plans to use education as a pathway out of poverty, Wright's mockery escalates to include dramatic eye-rolling and exaggerated expressions of boredom. His behavior suggests that he views Jordan's positive character, traits, and aspirations as weaknesses deserving of ridicule rather than qualities worthy of respect. The contrast between the victim and his killer becomes starkly apparent through Wright's courtroom conduct. While Jordan had represented hope, ambition, and the possibility of positive change in his community, Wright embodies the destructive forces that prey upon such individuals. His inability to show even basic human decency in the face of a family's grief reveals a level of moral corruption that extends far beyond typical criminal behavior. Judge Caprio's internal struggle becomes visible to experienced court observers who recognize the signs of judicial anger approaching dangerous levels. His jaw muscles tighten as he listens to Wright's continued laughter during descriptions of Jordan's impact on classmates and teachers. The judge's reputation for maintaining professional composure under extreme circumstances makes his visible emotion all the more significant. The courtroom atmosphere grows increasingly tense as spectators begin to murmur among themselves about Wright's behavior. The natural human response to his cruelty creates an undercurrent of outrage that threatens to disrupt the formal proceedings. Bailiffs position themselves more strategically, recognizing that the situation could escalate beyond their normal security concerns. Wright seems oblivious to or unconcerned about the hostile environment his behavior has created. His continued mockery of the victim impact statement suggests either complete psychological disconnect from reality or a deliberately calculated attempt to inflict maximum emotional damage on Jordan's family. Either explanation points to a level of dangerousness that extends beyond his original crime to encompass ongoing threats to public safety and human decency. The moment that transforms the entire proceeding occurs when Wright leans forward in his chair and directs his attention toward the section where Jordan's family sits. His movement is deliberate and predatory, designed to ensure that his next action will have maximum impact on the people who have already suffered more than any family should endure. With calculated cruelty, Wright mouths words that carry across the silent courtroom like a physical assault on the grieving family. "I'll be home soon." The message is accompanied by a gesture that points first to himself and then toward the courtroom exit, reinforcing his belief that the legal system cannot effectively punish him for his crimes. The impact of Wright's taunt reverberates through the courtroom like an explosion. Karen Clee's carefully maintained composure crumbles as she realizes that the killer of her son is not only unrepentant but actively malicious in his treatment of her family. Her sobs fill the courtroom as family members rush to comfort her, their own grief compounded by witnessing this additional cruelty. Spectators gasp audibly at Wright's behavior, their expressions of shock and outrage creating a low rumble of voices that threatens to overwhelm the formal structure of the proceedings. Some rise from their seats in spontaneous reaction to what they have witnessed, while others sit frozen in disbelief that anyone could display such callousness in a court of law. Judge Caprio's face transforms as he witnesses Wright's deliberate torment of the victim's family. The controlled anger he has displayed throughout the hearing gives way to something approaching rage as he realizes that he is not simply dealing with a young criminal who made tragic choices, but with someone who actively enjoys inflicting pain on others and shows no capacity for human empathy. The bailiffs step forward, their hands moving instinctively toward their equipment, as they recognize that the situation has moved beyond typical courtroom disruption into uncharted territory. Their experience with maintaining order during emotional proceedings has not prepared them for a defendant who deliberately provokes the victim's family while facing his own sentencing. Wright's defense attorney stares at his client with a combination of professional horror and personal revulsion. He understands that Wright's behavior has not only destroyed any possibility of judicial sympathy, but has likely triggered consequences that could extend far beyond the original plea agreement. His legal training tells him that judges possess significant discretion in sentencing, and that discretion can be influenced by courtroom conduct in ways that dramatically alter a defendant's future. The culmination of Wright's disrespectful behavior reaches its peak as Judge Caprio slams his gavel with unprecedented force. The sound echoes through the courtroom like a gunshot, commanding immediate attention and signaling that the court's patience has reached its absolute limit. "Order! Order in this court!" The judge's voice carries a level of authority and barely contained fury that silences every whisper and stills every movement in the packed courtroom. This is the moment when everyone present realizes that they are witnessing something extraordinary, a confrontation between unrepentant evil and judicial power that will determine not only Wright's fate, but also serve as a testament to the legal system's ability to respond to the most extreme challenges to its authority and dignity. The echo of Judge Caprio's gavel reverberates through the courtroom like thunder, marking the moment when judicial patience transforms into righteous fury. The packed chamber falls into absolute silence as every person present recognizes they are witnessing an unprecedented confrontation between evil and authority. Judge Caprio rises from his seat, his black robes flowing around him like the wings of justice itself, his face transformed by an anger so profound it seems to radiate physical heat. "Mr. Wright, stand up immediately." The command explodes from Judge Caprio with such force that Wright's smirk falters for the first time since entering the courtroom. The judge's voice carries 23 years of accumulated wisdom about human nature, 23 years of witnessing the worst society has to offer, but never before has he encountered such deliberate cruelty directed at a grieving family during their moment of sacred testimony. Wright slowly rises from his chair, the shackles around his ankles creating a metallic symphony that underscores the gravity of this moment. Yet, even as he complies with the judge's order, his facial expression maintains traces of the arrogance that has defined his courtroom behavior. His posture suggests compliance born of necessity rather than respect, his eyes still holding vestiges of the amusement he has derived from tormenting Jordan's family. Judge Caprio's voice fills every corner of the courtroom as he begins an address that will define his judicial legacy and serve as a testament to the power of moral authority confronting unrepentant evil. In 23 years on this bench, I have never witnessed such callous disregard for human life. You sit there laughing while a mother mourns her murdered child. The words hit Wright like physical blows, each syllable carefully chosen to strip away the protective armor of indifference he has constructed around himself. Judge Caprio's decades of experience as both prosecutor and judge have taught him how to reach defendants who believe themselves beyond the reach of conscience or consequence. His voice combines the authority of the law with the moral outrage of civilized society confronting barbarism. "You executed an innocent teenager and find it amusing?" Judge Caprio continues, his eyes boring into Wright's with an intensity that seems to peer directly into the young man's soul. "You taunt his grieving family as if their pain provides you entertainment?" For the first time since entering the courtroom, Wright's arrogance begins to show cracks. The relentless force of Judge Caprio's moral authority creates fissures in the psychological armor that has protected him from acknowledging the full weight of his actions. His hands, previously relaxed at his sides, begin to tremble slightly as he realizes that he has pushed judicial patience beyond any recoverable point. The courtroom remains frozen in absolute silence as Judge Caprio's words continue to rain down upon Wright like hammer blows against an anvil. Spectators hold their breath. Attorneys pause their note-taking, and even the bailiffs stand more rigidly at attention as they witness judicial power being exercised at its most fundamental level. This is not simply a judge managing courtroom behavior. This is moral authority confronting evil and demanding accountability. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." Judge Caprio's command cuts through Wright's remaining defiance like a sword through silk. The young man's eyes, which have roamed freely around the courtroom throughout the proceedings, now lock onto the judge's face and find themselves unable to look away. The psychological impact of sustained eye contact with someone possessing absolute authority over his future begins to penetrate Wright's consciousness in ways that months of legal proceedings have failed to achieve. Judge Caprio's physical presence seems to expand as his moral outrage finds full expression. His shoulders square, his spine straightens, and his voice gains power with each word as he channels decades of experience dealing with criminals who believe themselves beyond the reach of justice. "You murdered Jordan Clee in cold blood, shooting him in the back of the head while he complied with your demands, and you have the audacity to mock his family's grief?" The specific details of Jordan's execution, spoken with such precision and moral clarity, force Wright to confront the reality of his actions in ways he has previously avoided. The clinical language of legal proceedings has allowed him to maintain psychological distance from the human consequences of his behavior, but Judge Caprio's words strip away that protective barrier and expose the raw evil of what he has done. Wright's mother, Antoinette Cardar, can no longer remain silent as she watches her son face the full force of judicial condemnation. She rises from her seat in the gallery, her maternal instincts overriding courtroom protocol, as she attempts to shield her child from consequences she has spent months helping him avoid. "Your Honor, he has mental problems." Her voice carries desperation born of watching 17 years of maternal protection crumble before the undeniable reality of her son's actions. "He doesn't understand what's happening," she continues, her words tumbling over themselves in frantic succession. "Emotional conditions. He has emotional problems that affect his judgment." Her defense of Wright represents the last desperate attempt to transform a calculated killer into a victim of circumstances beyond his control, to somehow explain away behavior that defies rational explanation. Judge Caprio's response to this maternal plea demonstrates the depth of his understanding about criminal behavior and the difference between genuine mental illness and deliberate evil. His voice softens slightly as he addresses Antoinette, recognizing the genuine pain of a mother watching her son face the consequences of choices she cannot comprehend. "Ma'am, I understand a mother's love, but what I see is not mental illness. What I see is evil, pure and simple." The judge's words hit Antoinette like physical blows, forcing her to confront the possibility that the child she has defended and protected has become something beyond her ability to save or excuse. Her face crumbles as she realizes that her attempts to shield Wright from accountability have failed, that the legal system will not accept her explanations or allow her maternal love to override the demands of justice. Judge Caprio's attention returns to Wright with renewed intensity as he prepares to deliver the most devastating revelation of the proceedings. His voice drops to a lower register, forcing everyone in the courtroom to strain forward to catch every word, creating an atmosphere of anticipation that makes his next statement all the more powerful. "Mr. Wright, there was a plea agreement in place, 23 to 50 years for second-degree murder, a sentence that would have allowed you to potentially rebuild your life while still in your 60s. Judge Caprio pauses, allowing the weight of what Wright has potentially lost to settle over the courtroom like a suffocating blanket. "Your behavior today, your complete lack of humanity, your mockery of this family's grief has changed everything." The words fall into the silent courtroom with the finality of a death sentence, each syllable carefully measured to communicate the magnitude of Wright's miscalculation. Wright's face undergoes a transformation as the implications of Judge Caprio's words begin to penetrate his consciousness. The smirk that has defined his courtroom presence disappears entirely, replaced by the first signs of genuine fear he has displayed since entering the building. His hands begin to shake more noticeably as he realizes that his arrogance has potentially cost him decades of freedom. "I am rejecting this plea agreement." Judge Caprio's declaration hits the courtroom like a physical force, causing gasps of shock from spectators and a look of absolute horror from Wright's defense attorney. The lawyer's face goes completely white as he realizes that his client's behavior has destroyed months of careful negotiation and potentially condemned him to life imprisonment. "You will face trial for first-degree murder. If convicted by a jury of your peers, you will face life without possibility of parole." Judge Caprio's words hang in the air like a sword suspended over Wright's future, each syllable representing years of freedom that his mockery of Jordan's family has potentially cost him. The courtroom erupts in whispered conversations as the magnitude of Judge Caprio's decision reverberates through the packed chamber. Wright's supporters look stunned by this turn of events, while Jordan's family members begin to embrace each other as they realize that true justice may finally be within reach. Wright himself stands frozen at the defense table, his mind struggling to process how quickly his situation has deteriorated from a negotiated sentence to the possibility of never seeing freedom again. The psychological armor of indifference that has protected him throughout the legal proceedings lies in ruins around him, destroyed by his own arrogance and Judge Caprio's unwavering commitment to justice. Judge Caprio raises his hand for silence, his gesture immediately stilling the courtroom conversations, as everyone waits to hear whether this devastating reversal represents his final word on Wright's fate. The judge's expression suggests that he is not finished with his moral education of the young killer who has shown such contempt for human life and judicial authority. The moment stretches endlessly as Wright realizes that his future now hangs entirely on whatever Judge Caprio chooses to say next, that his mockery of a grieving family has potentially transformed a manageable prison sentence into a lifetime of incarceration with no hope of release. The weight of Judge Caprio's words settles over the courtroom like a heavy shroud as Wright stands frozen at the defense table, his mind frantically attempting to process the catastrophic reversal of his fortunes. The plea agreement that had represented a pathway to eventual freedom now lies in ruins, destroyed by his own arrogance and callous disregard for the very people his actions had devastated. The possibility of life without parole looms before him like an abyss, threatening to swallow the remainder of his existence in concrete and steel. Judge Caprio observes Wright's transformation with the analytical eye of someone who has spent decades studying human behavior under extreme pressure. The smirk that had defined the young man's courtroom presence has completely vanished, replaced by the wide-eyed expression of someone confronting consequences they had never imagined possible. The trembling in Wright's hands has intensified, and his breathing has become shallow and rapid as the reality of his situation begins to penetrate the psychological barriers he had constructed to protect himself from accountability. The defense attorney's horror at this turn of events manifests in physical symptoms that are visible to everyone in the courtroom. His face has drained of all color, his hands shake as he shuffles through papers that no longer hold any relevance to his client's case, and his eyes dart frantically between Wright and Judge Caprio as he searches for some way to salvage a situation that has deteriorated beyond any possibility of legal remedy. Years of courtroom experience have taught him to read judicial temperament, and he recognizes that his client has pushed Judge Caprio far beyond the point where professional courtesy or legal precedent might offer protection. Wright's mother, Antoinette Cardar, remains standing in the gallery, her own face reflecting the dawning realization that her months of defending her son's behavior and making excuses for his actions have failed to prevent this moment of reckoning. Her maternal instincts continue to drive her toward protection of her child, but Judge Caprio's moral authority and the undeniable reality of Wright's courtroom conduct have stripped away her ability to construct believable explanations for behavior that defies rational justification. The victim's family members watch this unfolding drama with a mixture of vindication and continued grief that speaks to the complex emotions surrounding their quest for justice. While they take some satisfaction in seeing Wright finally confronted with meaningful consequences for his actions, no judicial decision can restore Jordan to life or heal the wounds that his senseless murder has inflicted upon their hearts and souls. Judge Caprio allows the full impact of his decision to resonate throughout the courtroom before continuing with words that will either offer Wright a final opportunity for redemption or cement his fate for the remainder of his natural life. His voice carries the weight of ultimate authority as he prepares to reveal whether his rejection of the plea agreement represents an irrevocable decision or a dramatic lesson in the consequences of moral bankruptcy. However, I am going to give you one opportunity, one chance to show this court, this family, and this community that somewhere inside you exists a human being capable of genuine remorse. Judge Caprio's words cut through the courtroom silence with surgical precision, offering Wright a lifeline that he neither deserves nor has earned through his behavior, but which represents the judge's commitment to justice tempered by the possibility of redemption. The conditional nature of this offer electrifies the courtroom atmosphere as everyone present realizes they are about to witness a moment that will define not only Wright's future, but also serve as a testament to the power of moral choice under extreme pressure. This is not simply a legal proceeding, but a profound test of human character, played out before an audience that includes the family of the victim and representatives of the community Wright's actions have traumatized. Judge Caprio leans forward, his physical posture emphasizing the critical importance of the moment he is creating. Show this court you possess any humanity whatsoever. Look at Mrs. Klee, the mother of the young man you executed, and apologize. Not because your lawyer tells you to, not because it might help your sentence, but because you took her son's life, and she deserves to hear acknowledgement of that fact from your own lips. The challenge Judge Caprio presents strips away every legal technicality, every procedural protection, and every strategic consideration that might typically influence a defendant's behavior in court. This is a pure test of Wright's capacity for human empathy and moral recognition, a moment when his response will reveal the true nature of his character without the protective filters of legal representation or calculated self-interest. Wright stands at the defense table, his body language reflecting the internal struggle between the arrogance that has defined his behavior and the stark reality of the consequences he now faces. His eyes dart between Judge Caprio and the section of the courtroom where Karen Klee sits surrounded by family members whose grief has been compounded by months of waiting for some acknowledgement that Jordan's life had meaning and value. The silence that fills the courtroom during this moment of decision carries the weight of ultimate moral testing. Every person present understands that they are witnessing a defining moment in Wright's life, a crossroads where he must choose between the path of continued defiance that will likely lead to life imprisonment and the possibility of demonstrating some vestige of humanity that might allow for a different outcome. Karen Klee, despite months of grief and the additional trauma of watching her son's killer mock her family's pain, maintains a dignity that speaks to her fundamental character and the values that Jordan himself had embodied during his brief but meaningful life. Her eyes remain fixed on Wright as she waits to see whether the person who destroyed her world possesses any capacity for acknowledging the magnitude of what he has taken from her. The tension in the courtroom becomes almost unbearable as Wright struggles with the most important decision of his young life. His previous arrogance has evaporated completely, replaced by the recognition that his future hangs entirely on his ability to demonstrate some connection to basic human decency. The gang tattoos that had previously served as symbols of his criminal identity now seem like mere decorations on a person facing the ultimate test of character. Judge Caprio's offer represents more than legal mercy. It embodies the fundamental belief that even the most morally bankrupt individuals retain some capacity for recognizing the humanity of their victims and the pain their actions have caused. This moment tests not only Wright's character, but also the broader philosophical question of whether genuine redemption remains possible even in cases of premeditated murder, followed by callous disregard for the consequences. Wright's internal struggle becomes visible to everyone in the courtroom as he grapples with concepts that his criminal lifestyle has taught him to reject as signs of weakness. The gang culture that shaped his worldview celebrates violence and views empathy as a character flaw that makes individuals vulnerable to exploitation. Yet, the stark reality of potentially spending the remainder of his life in prison forces him to confront the possibility that his adopted value system has led him to this moment of ultimate consequence. The The defense attorney watches his client's internal battle with professional fascination and personal horror, recognizing that Wright's response will determine whether his legal career includes a case that ended with appropriate justice or one that resulted in a life sentence that could have been avoided through basic human decency. His years of experience defending criminals have exposed him to various forms of moral bankruptcy, but Wright's courtroom behavior has challenged his fundamental beliefs about human nature and the possibility of redemption. Wright slowly turns his attention toward Karen Klee, his movements careful and deliberate, as he prepares to make the choice that will define the remainder of his existence. The physical act of looking directly at the mother of his victim requires him to confront the human consequences of his actions in ways he has spent months avoiding through psychological defense mechanisms and deliberate indifference. Karen Klee meets Wright's gaze with eyes that reflect months of grief, anger, and desperate hope that some acknowledgement of Jordan's worth might emerge from this confrontation with his killer. Her presence in the courtroom represents not just a quest for justice, but a mother's need to know that her son's life had meaning beyond the circumstances of his death. The moment stretches endlessly as Wright stands at the crossroads between continued defiance and the possibility of demonstrating some vestige of humanity. His choice will determine not only his legal fate, but also whether he possesses any capacity for moral growth or remains trapped in the psychological prison of his own making. Judge Caprio watches this internal battle with the patience of someone who understands that genuine moral transformation cannot be rushed or coerced, that it must emerge from within the individual, facing the choice between continued evil and the first steps toward acknowledging the humanity of others. The courtroom holds its collective breath as Wright prepares to speak words that will either begin his journey towards some form of redemption or confirm his complete moral bankruptcy in the face of ultimate consequences. Wright's mouth opens slightly as if to speak, but no words emerge. The internal battle raging within him plays across his features like a storm system moving across an open landscape. For several agonizing seconds, he stares directly at Karen Klee, her tear-streaked face reflecting months of grief and the faint hope that her son's killer might possess some fragment of human decency. The courtroom remains frozen in anticipation, every person present understanding that they are witnessing a moment that will define not only Wright's future, but also serve as a testament to the power of choice in the face of ultimate consequences. The silence stretches until it becomes almost unbearable. Wright's hands tremble more violently as he struggles with concepts foreign to the gang culture that has shaped his worldview. His lips move soundlessly, as if rehearsing words that refuse to take audible form. The weight of Judge Caprio's gaze, the expectant attention of the packed courtroom, and the devastating reality of his situation create a pressure that threatens to crush whatever remnants of conscience might exist within his criminal mentality. Then, in a moment that shatters any remaining hope for his redemption, Wright's expression hardens. The brief flicker of vulnerability disappears, replaced by the familiar mask of defiance that has characterized his behavior throughout the proceedings. He looks away from Karen Klee's face, breaking the connection that might have led to acknowledgement of her humanity and her loss. His posture straightens with renewed arrogance, and when he finally speaks, his words seal his fate with finality that reverberates through the silent courtroom. "I ain't apologizing for nothing." His voice carries the same callous indifference that defined his confession to police months earlier. Jordan got what he got. That's just how it is. The impact of Wright's words hits the courtroom like a physical force. Karen Klee's face crumbles as she realizes that the person who murdered her only child not only feels no remorse but actively chooses to compound her suffering through continued cruelty. Her sobs filled the chamber as family members rushed to support her, their own grief intensified by witnessing this final confirmation of Wright's moral bankruptcy. Judge Caprio's face transforms as he absorbs Wright's response. The controlled anger that had characterized his earlier intervention gives way to something approaching righteous fury tempered by judicial authority. His voice, when it emerges, carries the weight of 23 years of experience dealing with the worst aspects of human nature, but also reflects his shock at encountering evil so pure and unrepentant. "Mr. Wright, you have shown this court exactly who you are." Each word falls with deliberate precision, carefully chosen to strip away any remaining pretense or possibility of misunderstanding. A young man capable of execution-style murder without remorse. A person so morally bankrupt that you find amusement in the grief of your victim's family. Judge Caprio rises to his full height, his physical presence seeming to expand as he channels decades of judicial authority into this moment of ultimate moral reckoning. Society must be protected from individuals like you. Your behavior today has not only confirmed your guilt, but revealed the depths of your depravity. The judge's words carry beyond legal condemnation to encompass moral judgment that speaks to fundamental questions about human nature and the existence of evil in civilized society. Wright's refusal to show even basic human decency when offered a final opportunity for redemption has transformed this sentencing hearing from a routine legal proceeding into a profound confrontation between justice and unrepentant malevolence. Your choice to mock this family's grief, to taunt them with promises of early release, to treat their pain as entertainment, has sealed your fate more completely than any prosecutor's argument ever could. Judge Caprio's voice gains power with each phrase, building toward a conclusion that will define Wright's existence for decades to come. Wright's defense attorney watches in horror as his client's defiance destroys any possibility of judicial mercy. His years of legal experience have taught him to recognize the moments when cases move beyond procedural considerations into realms where moral authority supersedes technical legal arguments. Wright's behavior has created precisely such a moment, transforming Judge Caprio from an impartial arbiter into an instrument of societal protection against unrepentant evil. The courtroom atmosphere becomes electric with anticipation as Judge Caprio prepares to deliver his final judgment. Spectators lean forward in their seats, understanding that they are about to witness judicial power exercised at its most fundamental level. This is not simply sentencing, but moral condemnation backed by the full authority of the legal system. Dante Roger Wright, having rejected every opportunity for redemption, having shown contempt for your victim, his family, and this court, I hereby sentence you to 25 years to 52 years in state prison. Judge Caprio's voice carries the finality of iron doors closing, each word representing years of Wright's life that will be spent behind concrete walls and steel bars. You will serve a minimum of 25 years before becoming eligible for parole consideration. Given your complete lack of remorse and your continued demonstration of danger to society, I will be recommending to the parole board that you serve the maximum sentence. The judge's additional comments ensure that Wright's earliest possible release will occur only after he has spent more than half his natural life in imprisonment. Furthermore, you will serve additional concurrent sentences for armed robbery and conspiracy charges, resulting in a total sentence of 25 to 52 years. You will not be eligible for parole until you reach the age of 43, assuming the parole board determines at that time that you have undergone genuine transformation and no longer pose a threat to public safety. The mathematical reality of Wright's sentence hits him with devastating force. His legs buckle slightly as he realizes that his arrogance has cost him more than 2 decades of freedom, that he will miss his entire young adulthood and much of his middle age paying for his crimes and his callous behavior in court. Judge Caprio's final words carry both legal authority and moral instruction that extends beyond Wright to encompass everyone present in the courtroom. Take him away. This defendant will not have the opportunity to harm another family for a very long time. The bailiffs move forward to escort Wright from the courtroom, their professional demeanor reflecting the gravity of the moment. Wright's shackles create a metallic symphony as he shuffles toward the door that will separate him from freedom for the next quarter century. His earlier arrogance has completely evaporated, replaced by the stark realization that his choices have consequences that extend far beyond anything he had imagined possible. As Wright disappears through the courtroom doors, Judge Caprio turns his attention to the victim's family with an expression that combines judicial authority with genuine human compassion. His voice softens as he addresses Karen Klee and the relatives who have endured months of legal proceedings while grieving the loss of their beloved Jordan. Mrs. Klee, I want you to know that no sentence can bring Jordan back to you or heal the wounds that his senseless murder has inflicted upon your family. Judge Caprio's words acknowledge the fundamental limitation of legal justice in addressing the full scope of loss that violent crime creates. However, justice has been served in Jordan's memory. This defendant's complete lack of remorse and his cruelty toward your family during these proceedings have ensured that he will spend the prime years of his life in prison, unable to harm other families or mock other victims. The judge's words provide some measure of closure to Jordan's family, while affirming the broader principle that society will protect itself from those who prey upon innocent victims. His handling of Wright's case will serve as a powerful reminder that courtroom behavior matters, that showing respect for victims and their families can influence judicial decisions, and that unrepentant evil will face the full consequences of legal authority. Judge Caprio's final statement to the courtroom carries lessons that extend beyond this specific case to encompass broader questions about justice, accountability, and the protection of civilized society. Let this case serve as a reminder that our legal system exists to protect the innocent and ensure that those who choose evil face appropriate consequences for their actions. The courtroom begins to empty as the formal proceedings conclude, but the impact of what transpired will resonate far beyond these walls, serving as a testament to the power of moral authority, confronting unrepentant malevolence. The immediate aftermath of Judge Caprio's sentencing reverberates through the Michigan Department of Corrections system as Daunte Wright begins his journey into a prison world far removed from the gang lifestyle he had glorified on the streets of Ann Arbor. The 25 to 52-year sentence transforms from abstract legal language into concrete reality as Wright finds himself processed through intake procedures that strip away the last vestiges of his former identity. The tattoos that once proclaimed his gang allegiance now mark him as a target in a prison environment where loyalty shifts according to survival needs rather than street credibility. Wright's adjustment to prison life proves dramatically different from the easy time he had boasted about to Jordan's family. The arrogance that characterized his courtroom behavior evaporates quickly when confronted with the harsh realities of institutional life. Older inmates, many serving their own lengthy sentences for violent crimes, show little patience for a teenager whose lack of remorse and disrespectful courtroom conduct have become legendary throughout the prison system. The story of his taunting of a murder victim's family spreads through the facility, earning him a reputation that makes his daily existence far more challenging than he had anticipated. The mathematical reality of his sentence becomes Wright's constant companion as he marks days on a calendar that stretches endlessly into the future. At 17, the concept of serving 25 years minimum had seemed abstract, but the daily routine of prison. Life transforms those years into an overwhelming succession of identical days. His earliest possible parole date of 2042 represents more time than he has been alive, a span that encompasses his entire adult development, occurring within concrete walls and under constant supervision. Prison counselors who attempt to work with Wright during his early years of incarceration encounter the same defiant attitude that had characterized his courtroom behavior. Mandatory anger management sessions, educational programs, and psychological evaluations reveal a young man still resistant to accepting responsibility for his actions or acknowledging the humanity of his victims. His refusal to participate meaningfully in rehabilitation programs becomes part of his permanent record, documentation that will influence every parole consideration for decades to come. The impact on Jordan Klee's family follows a more complex trajectory as they attempt to rebuild their lives around the permanent absence of their beloved son and cousin. Karen Klee struggles with the dual nature of their legal victory, finding satisfaction in Wright's lengthy sentence while recognizing that no judicial decision can restore Jordan to life or heal the fundamental wound his death has created in their family structure. The justice they sought and received provides closure to the legal chapter of their nightmare, but opens a new phase of learning to live with permanent loss. Karen establishes a memorial scholarship in Jordan's name at Pioneer High School, creating a positive legacy that honors her son's dreams of higher education and his impact on classmates and teachers. The annual scholarship presentation becomes a community event that celebrates Jordan's life, rather than focusing on the circumstances of his death. Students who receive the award often speak about how Jordan's story has influenced their own choices and reinforced their commitment to education as a pathway to positive futures. The broader Ann Arbor community responds to Jordan's murder and Wright's courtroom behavior with renewed commitment to youth violence prevention programs. Local schools implement enhanced conflict resolution curricula. Community centers expand after-school programming designed to provide alternatives to gang involvement, and law enforcement agencies increase their focus on early intervention strategies that might prevent other young people from following Wright's path toward violence and incarceration. Wright's accomplices, Del Rio Gracie and Terrarius Ellison, serve as contrasting examples of how different responses to criminal justice proceedings can influence outcomes. Their acceptance of plea agreements and demonstration of appropriate courtroom behavior resulted in sentences of 15 to 30 years, significantly less than Wright's punishment. Both men participate actively in prison rehabilitation programs and maintain hope for earlier release through good behavior and genuine transformation, possibilities that Wright's defiant attitude has essentially eliminated. The legal community throughout Michigan studies Judge Caprio's handling of Wright's case as an example of how judicial discretion can be exercised when defendants demonstrate complete lack of remorse. Law schools incorporate the case into their curricula as an illustration of how courtroom behavior can influence sentencing decisions and how judges balance legal precedent with the need to protect society from unrepentant criminals. Defense attorneys use Wright's story as a cautionary tale when counseling clients about appropriate courtroom conduct. Media coverage of the case extends far beyond local news outlets, as Wright's story becomes a viral example of how arrogance and lack of remorse can transform manageable prison sentences into life-defining consequences. Social media platforms amplify discussion about youth violence, the importance of showing respect for victims' families, and the power of judicial authority when confronted with unrepentant evil. The case generates thousands of comments from viewers who express both outrage at Wright's behavior and admiration for Judge Caprio's firm response. Wright's mother, Antoinette Cardar, faces her own journey of coming to terms with the reality of her son's actions and character. Her initial defense of his courtroom behavior gradually gives way to painful recognition that her attempts to shield him from consequences may have contributed to his belief that rules and social expectations did not apply to him. She begins attending support groups for families of violent offenders, seeking to understand how she can maintain love for her son while acknowledging the harm he has caused to others. The appeals process that Wright initiates from prison proves futile, as appellate courts consistently uphold both his conviction and sentence. His legal arguments focus on claims of ineffective counsel and inappropriate judicial bias, but court records clearly demonstrate that his sentence resulted directly from his own courtroom behavior rather than any procedural errors. Each failed appeal reinforces the finality of his situation and the reality that his choices have created consequences that extend far beyond his original expectations. As years pass, Wright's case becomes a reference point for discussions about criminal justice reform, rehabilitation versus punishment, and the appropriate response to juvenile offenders who commit adult crimes. Academic researchers study his progression from troubled teenager to cold-blooded killer to unrepentant defendant, seeking to understand the factors that contribute to such complete moral breakdown and the possibilities for preventing similar trajectories in other at-risk youth. Judge Caprio's reputation within the legal community is enhanced by his handling of Wright's case, with colleagues praising his ability to balance compassion with firm enforcement of community standards. His willingness to reject a negotiated plea agreement based on the defendant's courtroom behavior becomes a landmark example of judicial authority exercised in defense of victims' dignity and community values. Speaking engagements at judicial conferences often reference his decision as an example of how moral leadership can complement legal expertise. By 2025, 8 years into his sentence, Wright remains incarcerated with no realistic prospect of early release. Prison records document continued disciplinary problems and resistance to rehabilitation programming, creating a paper trail that virtually ensures he will serve close to the maximum sentence. His behavior behind bars mirrors the same disregard for authority and lack of empathy that characterized his courtroom conduct, suggesting that his fundamental character remains unchanged despite years of incarceration. The lasting lessons of Wright's case extend beyond individual consequences to encompass broader principles about respect, accountability, and the protection of civilized society. Judge Caprio's handling of the proceedings demonstrates that courtrooms are sacred spaces where victims deserve dignity, and defendants must face the full consequences of both their crimes and their attitudes toward those they have harmed. The case serves as a powerful reminder that justice requires not only legal precision, but also moral courage to confront evil in all its forms. Jordan Klee's memory lives on through the scholarship that bears his name, the students who have been inspired by his story, and the community programs established to prevent other young people from becoming either victims or perpetrators of senseless violence. His dreams of college and positive contribution to society have been transformed into a legacy that continues to influence lives and create opportunities for others to achieve the goals that were stolen from him on that October night in 2016. The ultimate message of this tragic story affirms the power of choice and the permanence of consequences, reminding everyone that character revealed under pressure demonstrates who we truly are, and that justice, though sometimes delayed, will ultimately prevail when moral authority confronts unrepentant evil.